have you been interested in vitamin D?
For about 30 years. I worked as a clinical consultant in a big hospital in northwest England, and I was very concerned. It was quite a poor town, why poor people were getting a lot of illness, dying younger than people, and why ethnic Asian people, big population in the town, why they also had a very bad health profile and high death rates. And also why northwest England compared to the southeast of England. And after doing a lot of work on that, I realised that the key to it all is vitamin D. And that was my conclusion 30 years ago. And I've carried on working since then. And all I find is more and more evidence in support of the use of vitamin D and the correction of very widespread vitamin D deficiency. What you've just quoted was correct. 75 studies, proper studies. I have them all myself. And the factual comments made in the previous clip, they were factual. The politician said no facts whatsoever. Nothing factual in her statement. I'd love to see her debating the issue with the doctor who was giving the lecture in front of the board. There's been no public debate in this country, just like in Canada.
And it seems like worldwide this is being suppressed. You saw the doctor from the United States, openly declaring that he's calling it literally a pandemic of vitamin D deficiency. Would you see it somewhat in the same manner?
That's absolutely true. If 100 people develop COVID-19 infection, and if then 10 of them die, and if it's found that the 10 who died were all seriously deficient in vitamin D, then what did they die from? Did they die from COVID-19 or did they die from serious vitamin D deficiency? If we want to protect people against COVID-19, and what we should have done in March of last year, when the knowledge was already there, was to protect people by boosting vitamin D, by correcting the widespread vitamin D deficiency, which we heard about a few moments ago.
Are there not effects, we've read about effects of vitamin D apart from on the bones. You say that like vitamin D is very, very good for your bones.
Well, yeah, that was established a century ago. Ricketts in the new industrial towns with indoor work and heavy atmospheric pollution. The appearance of rickets, which could be corrected by fish oil or sunshine exposure. But it was also found even 100 years ago that vitamin D, it wasn't recognized then, but that sunshine and fish oils could correct and cure tuberculosis. And that was an immune effect. The word immunity wasn't known at that time, but this was way ahead of its time. And it's now known that vitamin D has a pivotal role in the escalation of immunity and also stopping the cytokine storm, as we've also just heard. These things have been known for 40 years.
Can you explain
Nothing
that?
new.
Right. And that's very interesting to me. So the cytokine storm, that can you describe what that is and how vitamin D plays a role in preventing that?
Yeah. Well, if you get a sudden injury, a sudden infection, you get, or a sting from a nettle, for example, you get an immediate reaction. An immediate reaction is inflammation, and it's redness, it's heat, it's swelling, and it's pain. Those are the 4 features of inflammation. But they are only a temporary, immediate response. Then there has to be a targeted response. And if it is in fact an infection, then the immune system has to come into play to kill off the infection. That requires vitamin D to initiate the event. But it also has to cut out the cytokine storm, which is defensive for a few hours, but if it goes on, it builds up and up and up, and it causes serious inflammation within the body, and that has to be controlled. The inflammation is an immediate response that has to subside, and if it doesn't subside, and that's called the cytokine storm.
So why
Can't put it any more clearly than that, I don't think.
yes, no, that is very clear. And why do
It's
we
actually
have
a very complicated process. It's a very,
right?
very complicated process. But we have to take word for it that the cytokine storm must be switched off, and that the inflammatory response must be curtailed, and the immune defense must then take over.
Right. Why are we having such a vitamin D deficiency? What is the cause and reason for that?
Well, let's take what happens is that when the sun acts on our skin, it converts an oil. We produce an oil in our skin, and it's called 7-DHC, and the sun converts it into vitamin D, which is then absorbed into the body. Now, you might be aware that older people, 80 onwards, very close on that, the skin becomes thin. You've noticed that in very old people, they do not produce the oil in their skin. You can sit them out in the sun for as long as you like, but they cannot produce vitamin D because they cannot produce the oil which the sun converts into vitamin D. Vitamin D deficiency is inevitable in the older people above the age of 80. It's absolutely inevitable. And they have to be protected by giving vitamin by mouth as a supplement. Nature perhaps only intended us to live for 70 years, 70. And if we live beyond 70, things start to go wrong. And one of the things that goes wrong is that the skin deteriorates. And as the skin deteriorates, vitamin D is no longer produced.
Right.
Therefore, they are very vulnerable.
Right. So, vitamin D then is basically something that we would get from the sun, but we have these little tablets that are also vitamin D. So, how are we producing that?
Well, the tablet or the capsule, vitamin D is an oil. It's a simple oil. It's produced in all animals, and it has been produced in all animals for 1.5 billion years, believe it or not, starting with plankton in the sea, still produced by plankton in the sea, and fish eat plankton, and we eat fish, and that's how we can get vitamin D from fish. Now, the oil in capsules, the vitamin D oil in capsules, no longer comes from fish oil, it comes from sheep's wool, because furry animals produce this oil, 7-DHC, in the skin, and it gets into the fur, and the sun shines on the animals, turns it into vitamin D, and the animals get their vitamin D by licking themselves. You've seen animals lick themselves. That's how they're taking vitamin D into the bodies. Sheep are the same. Now, what happens with sheep is that each summer they are sheared. All the wool is removed, and the wool contains an oil, and that oil contains vitamin D. So after they're all sheared, and this happens mainly in Australia and New Zealand, the fleece, the wool, is washed with a solvent, an oil solvent. It extracts, is then taken to China, where the oil is extracted from the solvent, vitamin D is concentrated, and it's then put in the capsules, believe it or not. And so we get our vitamin D capsules effectively from the oil in sheep's wool. It's amazing.
Wow.
Most vitamin D that's produced actually goes into animal feed. We care more about animals, farm animals, than we care about humans. 80